Yo, what's good? This is Myron. I got my homegirls here, Jennifer and Jade. Hey, we are looking forward to today's conversation. Welcome if this is your first time to the church next whatever episode. We're glad you're here. We're part of Leadership Network. And today is going to be super dope. We've been on this whole series called Business Made Missional. In fact, keep your calendars locked for August 4th because we're going to launch a summit behind this as well. But we wanted to take time and make space for the urban conversation. So today's episode is called Urbanomics. I don't know about you, but if you got friends who do ministry in the urban context, imagine the struggle you're having now and multiply that times 1,000. And more than likely in urban contexts, we are faced with the dilemma of how do we put food on our own table? And then also, how do we fund the ministry God has called us to? And so I have some good friends with us, my man, Bryant Lee, my man, Edward Robinson. You will want to know these guys' names because they're doing some cutting edge things in the inner city. And I think that they deserve our attention. So what's happening, my man? How y'all doing?
Great, man. It's good to be here. I'm super excited. Can't wait for us to jump in and attack some of these topics and hopefully give people hope who are struggling to what is going to be impeding recession. Gas prices are high. I see all kind of things now when people go put gas in their cars. I see people out there talking to the gas pump. So I know that in the hood, we got problems coming.
Right.
For sure. Amen to that. Hello to everybody. Looking forward to this conversation as we dig in on some of the details on a very necessary conversation regarding money and ministry and how that affects the urban church. And as Pastor Bryant Lee already sort of alluded to, the fact that we're going through a national inflation and some national problems in terms of economics. And so, like I always say, if there is if it's raining in the suburbs, there's a flood in the hood. So
wow. Wait, you can't listen, G. You cannot drop a bomb like that in the living room of the church next conversation without unpacking what you just said. And then after that, we're gonna pass it to the homegirl Jennifer, man.
Well, just real simple. If they're having some economic challenges in the suburbs, then the impact that we feel in the urban context is doubles, triple, quadruple that. And so if the nation is going through something, then the way that impacts urban communities is more intense. And so that's all that means. Yeah, rainstorm in the suburbs.
I just want our audience to know, if you're tuned in live or you're catching the replay, put your seatbelt on because you are in for a conversation that's going to encourage you and definitely challenge you. And with that, I'm gonna pass it to Jennifer.
Thanks so much, Myron. And I'm excited to have this conversation with Pastor Bryant Lee and Mr. Robinson, who just totally kicked the door in starting out. So
boom.
Right. So for the both of you, talk to us a little bit about your story. Just give us a little piece of each, how you got started, what brought you into the direction that you're walking in right now.
Well, I've been doing ministry in the hood for over 20 years. And I grew up in North St. Louis, very poor community. I was a street kid, meaning I hustled. I grew my own stuff, harvested my own stuff, spread my own stuff. But when I got into the church, most of the time in the urban setting, there was $20 lines, $50 lines, $30 lines. And I just thought people was like hustling. Well, they weren't really hustling. They were trying to keep the lights on. And so when I moved to Humble and it was time to plant a church in a very poor community, very diverse community, immigrant community, I recognized that we could no longer simply depend on tithes and offerings for ministry to happen in the hood. And I realized quite early on that, man, you can beat people down about giving, but you got to give people options. I work with an organization that often says poverty is a lack of options. And so when you're in the hood often, what's missing is options. Like my man Ed said, in the suburbs, they have options for everything. But in the hood, there's limited resources, there's limited opportunities. They're not people, when your local economic development organization is thinking about where it's going to launch its next big campaign, they're not thinking about MLK Boulevard, right? They're normally thinking about George Bush Boulevard, right? Because they want to go where they can get what they believe the highest return for their investment. What they don't understand is that those of us who've been in the urban ministry for a long time, we have learned by trial and error, right? How to make ends meet and how to make things work. We've learned how to grind it out. We've learned grit. We've learned how to put our heart and soul into it. And so when you approach it from that perspective, you really learn that, nothing's impossible if people have passion, purpose, and opportunity.
Oh, come on, man.
That's good. What about you, Mr. Robinson?
That's good, Doc. Edward Robinson, I'm a pastor at a church in Charlottesville, Virginia, Tiki Torch Town. But before that, really where this all gets started for me is my time when I was in Camden, New Jersey. And so me and my family had moved to Camden, New Jersey to be a part of Epiphany Camden. And at the time, that church was planted in 2011 by Pastor Doug Logan, who's still my mentor, and who now serves as vice president of Acts 29. And so back then, when I was a part of that church plant, 2014, I came in to be a part of that. And Doug just sat me down and explained to me all the which and ways which he had to run and jump through all kinds of hoops to plant an urban church. And so what I began to sort of deduce from that reality was, we don't just got a mission problem, we got a money problem. And because he was talking about how he had to get on the airplane and go shake his missional moneymaker, so to speak, to go in front of all of these churches to raise some money. And in the midst of all of that, I really realized that put a level of pressure on urban pastors with trying to pastor a church, trying to be a fundraiser, and trying to raise their families. And so you're trying to raise a family, you're trying to raise finances, and you're trying to raise the church. And so that reality and sort of that tri-vocational ministry, because you're trying to do a lot of things and too many.
I like that. I'm gonna steal that, Robinson. I'm gonna steal that.
So that's really where, for me, the way that just my brain works and my mind works, it really birthed a passion in me in the area of economics. And so later on, I would go get an MBA, and you always find me reading a book, something like this one, The Great Evangelical Recession. Find me reading books about anything about church or finance, you're gonna find me reading it. And so what that does is, for me, is that it really what I'm really trying to do is to get the urban ministers free from having to make money-based decisions. And so the idea is for us to be free for the Spirit to lead us, not just for the cash to lead us. And one of the issues is that every dollar that we were fundraising, we realized came with a string attached.
Oh, yeah.
And so it came with a string of relationship that I got to go fly to this church to go preach there because they given this amount of money. If I don't go, then I'm messing up that relationship. And then I got to fly over here. And so we're getting money from so many different areas that we end up looking like a puppet with so many different strings attached to us, pulling us in different ways. The other thing that I began to notice, which fueled this passion, was that a lot of times our money was coming from spaces that didn't always agree with our philosophy of ministry. And so when issues came up politically, then that really hampered relationships. And so the idea for me is simple. I want the urban minister to be free in order to do what Christ has called them to do. And a part of that is getting them free financially.
Yep.
Amen. I feel like we're only on question 1, but already there's so many gems being dropped already. So I'm excited for this episode. So I'm a missionary here. So I've been exclusively in urban ministry now for 5 years in total. Pastor Bryant, you said that you have 20 years experience. In the 5 years I've been around, I've learned so much. So in that 20 years, I can imagine how much you have learned. But what's one thing about urban ministry specifically that you have learned over that 20 years?
I think courageous leadership. You have to be willing to take risk and uncalculated risk. You know, in the suburban context, they take what you call calculated risk because they can almost pinpoint how things are going to turn out. You have to run the risk of failure in order to succeed. And so that's first and foremost. And then you have to be willing to take every ounce of everything that you have and push your chips to the center of the table. You're always pushing your chips to the center of the table. We're always in a win-lose situation. There's never a draw for us, right? And so some of the things that I've learned is that I have to constantly be thinking about how to create multiple streams of income for myself as well as for the ministry that I'm leading. I can no longer depend on a few faithful people to give. In fact, studies tell us that we are facing the largest wealth transfer in America, right? And possibly in the world, and that the generations coming behind the baby boomer generation no longer sees the need for ministry. One of the things that really probably stood out to me when you think about urban ministry in America is that some of our vanilla ministries were very comfortable funding ministries overseas to people who look like me, but they would not come down the street and partner with the person who looked like me. And so we had to deal with all of those issues and really challenge people, right? That it all belongs to God. Right. And if that we're serious about seeing our communities transformed, they're not going to be transformed at a local prayer meeting. You know, at the end of the day, one of my mentors says this best, and I love it. He says, salvation is free, but ministry costs. And we have to be honest with people by telling them, right, hey, when you click on the lights and you turn on the AC and you give out a bottle of water, none of that's free. Right. And we can't see ourselves. Here's the big lesson. We cannot see ourselves as second-class citizens in this deal called ministry, right? It's different, right? And it's unique, but God has uniquely wired and gifted us in such a way, right? That when we pull the creative gem together, that we can see amazing things happen. Here's what I tell people, you know, right now in the urban setting, we have to repurpose our buildings. We have to repurpose our budgets, and we got to give purpose to our babies all the way to our old ladies. We can no longer wait for the next generation to get to a certain age or a certain confidence level. We have to start them early. Here's what I've learned. Dave Ramsey doesn't work in the hood because I don't have a 401k. Wow. I don't have a 403b. I don't know how to budget money, right? I don't have a house and 2 cars, right? I don't have a bank account. You know, I remember some time ago when I came to Humble, I was working with the Rush Card. I was trying to create a deal with them, right, where they would lower their fees so that we could get people in the hood bank accounts, right? And so here's the big lesson. The starting point in urban communities are different. In other words, my friends in the suburbs, they're already at the starting line, but I'm starting 10 paces behind them. But that's also a factor of what's happening in America over 400 years, right? We've always started at a different starting point. And in the urban communities, the starting point is always different. We have less resources. We have less help from local governments. Our buildings tend to need more attention. Our people need more attention. It's the influx where our returning citizens come. You know, listen, here's one big deal, right? We can change the landscape of incarceration by creating sustainable entrepreneur programs for our returning citizens, right? If we could just teach our returning citizens how to take what was an illegal skill, flip that to a legal skill, not only will we create business in the urban setting, right? Not only will we create business, we will create our own jobs. But to do that, ministries have to see things in a much different way. We have to be willing to have strategic partnerships with people who don't always think like us. So I'm always mindful of the story in Luke chapter 7, when they come and talk about the centurion who built the synagogue for God's people, right? He probably was never going to step foot in that synagogue, but here was a strategic partnership in order for the gospel to flow further and faster than it would had they not had that strategic partnership. So as you can tell, I'm super passionate about it because what I learned was when I walk in a room, there's an assumption based off of where I'm coming from and who I am that I don't have any economic that I don't have economic intelligence. And then when I open my mouth, I heard things like, "Oh my God, you really know what you're talking about." What they really want to say is, I didn't know brown and black people could be on this level.
Yeah. You know what? I just want to, you know, like in the game, maybe between Boston and the other team, who is it, Curry and them. Like you just
Yeah,
got,
the Warriors.
let's call a timeout real quick. Let's call a timeout because everybody watching have they fainted. They need a water break because you just said a whole lot that I think I want to recap for a minute. And one of the things that Ed said was that his desires to get urban ministers free from making money based decisions. And the reason why this episode is so good is because whether we're in urban or suburban, how many times do we make decisions based on money? Or rather the lack of money. We don't have this, so we can't. And then when you think about how we in the urban context have to create multiple streams of income, Ecclesiastes 11:2, King Solomon said, then all of a sudden we do have to wrestle with the realities of the strings that are attached. And then I love what Bryant Lee is bringing to the table. It's like in an urban context, the reality is that not just that we're 10 steps behind the starting line, but that we have had to learn how to be resilient, how to strategize around repurposing our buildings. I love what you said, our buildings, our budgets, and from babies to old ladies, I'm still in that. And then the reality of recognizing that for us, urbanomics means also that we're not saying that we're alienating anybody. We believe that everybody has a role in God's family, but that there are these strategic partnerships, such as Luke 7, when the centurion comes and he helps to build and finance what God is doing. I love this. And here's the reality. And I want to ask maybe Ed, when you think about like the financial strain of inner cities, like how are you helping people to navigate that? And then Bryant Lee, I would love for you to follow up on that question as well.
So I'll lay out we got short-term solutions and long-term solutions to helping ministry leaders navigate the financial challenges. And so a couple of them. So in the short term, I have to say this too. Like we're doing this, it's June 2022. We officially this week entered into a bear market in the United States. What that means is that stocks are down significantly, okay? We are likely entering into a recession in this country, which means that there is a financial storm brewing in the nation. And so we need for pastors and ministers to be very strategic in how they move, particularly over this next 18 to 24 months. Let me be simple like this. I'm here to be Joseph in a little bit. And Joseph, in respect to the house of Pharaoh in Egypt, had something to say about how they should function before the famine really hit. And so that really matters. So I just want to lay that out. So here are a couple solutions and ways in which I think will be helpful for ministers in urban context. First of all, lead by example. So if you are looking to increase the financial health of your church, then you have to increase your financial health. That means it's very important that you pay attention to your income and your outgo, your personal budget. Because what happens is the habits that you practice are the habits that you reproduce in other people. So it becomes very important for us to lead by example and not to just practice what we preach, but as my sister said, you must preach what you've practiced. And so that becomes very important. So that's one thing. I think, so leading in that way. The other thing that I think is important is knowing your actual numbers of your organization, of your church. You have to know your numbers. You have to know how much you got in expenses and how much you got coming in income. And you have to know what percentage of expenses are going to what. Are we really spending that much money on ministry, or are we more spending money on the building? And so I think that's very important to know your numbers, to know your expenses, and to know what percentage. Like, for example, if over 65% of your church's expenses is due to salaries, you're already in a danger zone. So if you're spending over 65% of your money on church salaries, then you need to try to figure out how to get that cut down to about 45 to 55% is one thing. The other thing you need to pay attention to your cash reserves, right? All of that stuff. So there's a lot of numbers I could go through, but that's if you're going to be an overseer of something, then you got to know your numbers. The other thing that I think is important is, and this is very, very true. So having a stewardship plan or a financial plan for your church will increase your church's survival rate by 178%. Pause. Listen to that. You will increase your chances of survivability by 178% simply by having a financial plan for your church. A plan that is based on reality, on some real projections, not just bloated and floated and all cloud is in the sky plan. You need a plan based on real projections. That will help you to increase your survivability rate. And then another thing, last thing I'll tell you in the short term, we can get to long term later, is that we need to talk about this stewardship in our churches on a regular basis, because it is a major point of discipleship in your church. How your people spend their time and how they spend their money says a lot about what they believe about Jesus. And so we have to teach our people that. Now, let me pause though and say this. Because many of us are serving in urban context, we're serving poor people. We cannot do what the suburban church does. They automatically go toward a conversation on giving. Don't do that, urban minister. Don't do that. Because what you've done is the only thing that you've taught poor people how to do is how to give their money to you. That is wrong. That's wrong. If the only thing you teach poor people is how to give their money to you, that is called religious exploitation. That's the type of stuff Jesus gets upset about. So let's not do that. We want to teach our people to be generous, but we have to teach them some of the basic, as Bishop Lee said. Our folks are not coming to the table with some basic financial understanding of how to work in order to save, in order to invest, in order to pay down our debt. We got to get there. We want to teach generosity as a piece of the bigger picture of stewardship. So I'll stop there.
Let me jump in, Ed. We just don't want to teach generosity. We must model generosity from a corporate perspective. And here's what I mean by that. So every dollar that comes in needs an assignment. But not only that, there should be some dollars that come in that is going to be reinvested in the local community and in local people, whether they're a missionary, church planter, or a member in the pew. Watch this, catch this, because this one people ain't gonna hold on to, or just a community member that's never gonna walk through our doors. Because here's the deal: when the community gets better, we all get better. So we have to be for the whole community and not just for the neo-Christian community, right? And so this is how we build bridges. And so obviously there are parameters on what we'll invest our dollars in, but the church should have its own community development corporation, a separate nonprofit arm, a for-profit arm. If a church is not operating from multiple streams of generating, creating, and distributing, did y'all catch that? Distributing the revenue to others so that we can make what's happening in the urban context better, then we are failing our people. You know what? I love when the pastors stand up and say, hey, we're going to do X, Y, Z in Haiti. What I want to know is what we're going to do in Haverstock down the street. I love when you tell me you're going overseas to help somebody, but can we go across the street and help this brother and sister that we see obviously struggling, right? And so not only do we want to create economic opportunity for our people, here it is, we also want to create employability for our people. That comes back to say, man, who do we need to partner with long term, right? How do we need the businesses that already exist and those that don't exist now? If you don't have an entrepreneur incubator system in your church, you're missing your people. You ought to be teaching entrepreneurship, right, as a means of creating income and building a legacy for the next generation. That's just the reality of it. I've been listening for the last few years about Black Wall Street and this and that and this and that. But what I don't hear is people saying how we're going to get at it, right? The Bible says the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. Now, here's the reality of that, right? Poor people stay poor because, again, nobody is giving them tracks and lanes to run on. Nobody's building hope into them. I love it when I see a dude that has on a shirt that says, I'm the neighborhood hope dealer. I always stop and say, how are you spreading hope? Because if all you got, here it is, guys, if all you got is John 3:16, I want to know after I come to Christ, how I'm going to feed my children. After I come to Christ, what's going to keep me from hustling? After I come to Christ, right, what's going to make my life better? Right? The gospel is just not a gospel of Jesus getting out the grave. There are long-term implications of the gospel. When he says in John 10 that you might have life and have life more abundantly, what does that mean in the here and now? This is not the prosperity gospel, right? But here's the deal. What that means is that there should be opportunities for people within our ministries, whether it's our churches, our nonprofits, for them to partake and for them to get better. And we ought to become our own source of investment in our community. We ought to see people in our churches starting investment clubs. We ought to be partnering. We ought to be championing that. We ought to be championing small business in our churches. We ought to be championing the dude who hustles, cleaning, flipping tires and T-shirts, just as much as the person who has the local neighborhood corner store. So there needs to be a corporate emphasis. Part of our vision has to be, we like to say shalom. Shalom means nothing missing, nothing broken. It means wholeness. We cannot get to wholeness if part of our community is suffering and nobody's paying attention to it. Somebody, John Adolph preached a sermon and said, somebody go get Leroy. Well, somebody got to go show Leroy that he doesn't have to keep doing it the way he's doing it.
Absolutely. And can you talk to us a bit about some advice then? Because, you know, some pastors might be listening to this and thinking, well, how am I going to help Leroy if myself and my church are struggling right now as it is? So this question is for both of you as well. So what advice would you give to pastors that are currently struggling to fund their mission or to fund their ministry, or their church? What practical steps and advice would you give?
Well, first and foremost, let me say this. We have no full-time staff at our church. We're all by vocation, right? We're entrepreneurs, business owners, and that's first and foremost. Like Ed talked about, when 65% of your budget is going to fund staff who are sitting in offices all day or at Starbucks on a computer, well, that is poor stewardship. So the first deal is to look at your staff, right? And assess their gifts, talents, and strengths. And start the process of helping them first and foremost create multiple streams of income and reducing unneeded staff, right, down and moving people who are on full-time salary, probably the part-time salaries, probably the stipends, right? So that's the first deal, is to assess the church financial situation as it relates to staff. Secondly, is this here. You don't have to do everything. You don't have to know everybody, and you don't have to be everywhere. Here's the deal. Choose one or two things based off the gift mix in your current congregation that we can do super well, and put all your attention and effort right there. What happens for a lot of guys in the urban context, they are cut and paste ministry. You see something that somebody else is doing and you think that I can do that. You can't do that, number one, because you don't have those same people in your congregation. Number two, that's not your community. You have to go out and assess the real tangible needs of your community and then say, hey, here's an area where we can win and consistently, right? And we can consistently bring hope to this area. And listen, start where you are, the Shamgar principle. Start where you are and what you have. Stop wishing that you had more or that you can do more. God knows how much you can handle. Right? And so if God has given you a ministry of 200 and not 2,000, celebrate that. Listen, our church has never been over 300 people. But if you go back, we went back and we looked at the last 10 years, millions of dollars have flowed through our church in resources and product and dollars and in training to people in our community. So listen, it's not so here's what I tell pastors. It's not the size of your ministry or how many people showing up on Sunday. It's the influence that your church can have in your community. If you have a large church and no influence, you're still small.
Wow. I say that all the time. I say that all the time. I say, you know, if we're going on that old scorecard of attendance does not equal influence.
No.
It's impact that was influence. I love what you're talking about. You're giving some practical steps on ways that we can get started. And when we talk about assessing like your financial situation, like think about creating a dashboard whereby you can measure key metrics when it comes to finances, and then like getting crystal clear on the one thing. I think in this season, less is more, right? One of the things that Facebook discovered over there, I don't know, over the last year, studies on the impact of COVID and how it's affected Generation Z. And one of the things Generation Z left COVID wanting more was what Facebook would call raw authenticity. Like raw authenticity, idea of being authentically raw about who you are, because obviously our circles got smaller. And when I think about COVID, politics, and race, I've been saying for the last year, I feel like my circle has gotten smaller. And yet, although it's gotten smaller, the quality has increased, right? And so speaking of friendships and relationships and circles, I don't think any one of us on this call got to where we are because of who we are, but because of somebody else. And so I'm curious, who has influenced you in this idea of urbanomics, understanding finances, understanding creating new revenue streams for the church, figuring out what you do well? Who would you point to, or what resources would you point to that could really help our audience in this area?
I'll try to pull one off the shelf here. And I'll just give credit to a brother. His name is Mark DeMoss. He wrote this book called The Coming Revolution in Church Economics. That really helped me to start on this path of research in this area. I'll definitely give him credit. I definitely have to give the guy I still call my pastor, Doug Logan, credit for the way in which he pioneered. And I learned a lot from both his wins and his losses. I'll also give some credit to a ministry that I follow that I think is helpful, is Crown Financial Ministries, guy by the name of Chuck Bentley, who heads up that ministry. So get the book, The Coming Revolution in Church Economics. Check out Crown Financial and some of their discipleship material regarding economics. I think it's helpful. I'm actually, so that's that. There's a lot other. I'll throw. I think I'll cut it there. I could go on and on and on.
I would say a guy who greatly impacted my life is a longtime quiet warrior in the faith, was Dr. Tony Evans, with the Turnaround Agenda and the work that he was able to do in the Oak Cliff community. He could have left the Oak Cliff community, but he stayed there. When you go there and you visit not only their campus, their thrift store, the way that they serve the community as a whole is an amazing deal. But years ago, what started me on my journey was that I read a book by a guy named Floyd Flake called The Way of the Bootstrapper. And it got me thinking, right? Floyd Flake at the time was a pastor in New York and he was a senator, got me thinking. Early on, guys like Kirby John Cotwell and Windsor Village, they were doing some cutting edge ministry. And so I began to search out like-minded people around the nation who was saying, man, how do we best impact our community for greatness? There's a guy in St. Louis named Mike Jones, has a church, clinic, hospital, entrepreneur incubators, bought up half of all the stuff around the church. He's created a kingdom neighborhood in the midst of the hood, high level excellence, things of that nature. And so where he's constantly giving back everything from scholarships to entrepreneurship grants, partnering with the city, partnering with the state, all those things, often.
Can I ask you something, Bryant Lee? Can I ask you something? This is kind of it's a side question. I notice a gap. Between the older generation, millennials, and then Gen Z. So like when you throw out names like this, many of people my age or younger, for the most part, wouldn't even know these cats and like the things that they've done. How do we bridge the gap with the wealth of information that you guys have shared, that you've learned from others, so that the next generation generally can, so that we can really, so that our ceiling can really become their floor? Because I find that there, man, is this great gap, and it's like generations are being pitted against one another. It's either all y'all outdated and y'all don't really get it, or versus, oh man, y'all don't want to listen. And so we got, you know what I mean? We got these almost opposing generations, and yet it doesn't seem like collectively, I know people are doing great things around the nation, but it's like there's not this collective urban renaissance where ministries are thriving financially to accomplish the mission of God. How do we fill the gap?
I think two things. Number one, I think those of us who've been at it a long time have a responsibility for opening doors and putting the younger generation in rooms and in places to bring new creative ideas, while at the same time knowing Ecclesiastes says there's nothing new under the sun. So a guy like me, I'm a bridge builder. I stand between the two generations. And so I have a responsibility to bring guys whose shoulders we're standing on into the room with these new guys who are going to carry the mission and the mandate forward and further. And so I think it requires both of those. I think the other deal is that when I think about guys like Troy Evans, because I see her wearing a Hustle Pray Eat shirt, and I think about Myron Pierce or Maurice Winley up in New York, or Carl Day in Philly, I think we have to create a repository in the 21st century that is accessible to everybody. Here's the problem that I have with this generation. It is a selfish generation. Bible declares, naked I came in this world and naked I have to leave. I can't take anything with me. To leave a legacy, you have to be willing to deposit all of you. You have to leave it all here for the next generation. And so I think that we have a responsibility, both old and young, is to get everybody in the room and make space, here it is, for courageous conversations without demeaning one another. You know, the same deal is this here, Myron. The older generation doesn't believe that the young guys, the young cats got anything to offer because they think they just, they full of themselves. But the reality is we were all full of ourselves at one point.
Wow.
The generation before us said that, right? You know, and so unless we are intentionally handing off the baton, right? The urban community will continue, watch this and listen carefully, will continue to be raped by prospectors who can come in and take control because we're not handing the baton off. And the older generation has a succession responsibility that they must hand it off to the next generation while they still have time to do so.
Why do you find it? I find it very hard. Again, I didn't grow up in the church. Like most people had the privilege of growing up in the church. My church was a street. But like, I find that older urban pastors are staying in the pulpit longer than they should.
Can I talk about that, please?
Like they old and kicking. They should be kicking it somewhere in Waikiki or somewhere. But they hold on to that thing. And so when I hear you say like the passing on the baton, maybe there's some older urban pastors watching. Like, give us some specifics on what succession looks like and how that relate. Because when you talk about succession, I think that's what's a part of that is the financial piece. You know what I mean? So how can older pastors pass the baton, and how can younger pastors and leaders take the baton?
Before you jump in, let me say this. We've created a model where that older pastor can receive his current income until he dies, because We've raised up an entrepreneurial model with the new younger pastor, and he doesn't need the church to feed him, right? And so what we've tried to do is go into churches and say, Pastor, you're 80 and blind. Let us, and you didn't invest any money because, for various reasons. A lot of times it just wasn't poor stewardship. It was just, I didn't know any better. And so we try to create an environment. We try to create an environment where we create options for that older pastor to hand the baton off. And the only way for us to do that, I have to take a young guy like you or Ed, and I got to make sure that I help you guys create enough income that y'all can come into that environment and your family won't start. Listen, Jesus sacrificed himself on the cross. You don't have to sacrifice yourself. Go ahead, Ed.
No, you've already hit on it. The reluctance to give up a position has everything to do with economics and identity.
Wow.
And so there are two things that you have to do. You have to figure out a way for him to retire financially. That's very difficult later on in the years. This is why I'm having conversations with guys now. I want to be able to work with pastors now to develop annuities, to get life insurance policies in place, and to get retirement plans in place now. Because what I don't want for you is for you to lead past your effectiveness.
Man.
So there are too many pastors who are leading past their effectiveness and past their season because they cannot afford to stop financially. That's the first thing. Second thing is they cannot afford to do away with the identity of preaching and pastoring. And so you have to repurpose them to pastoral counseling, to pastoring pastors, or writing a book. You have to repurpose them in their older age and honor them in their legacy. And you have to get in early on getting them financially prepared to not have that seat anymore. And so those are the two things that Bishop Lee was getting at, is that he is creating opportunities where these young pastors can come in and take the position without having to take the money away from this older pastor who has not been financially cared for throughout the legacy of his pastor or her pastoring.
That is so good. I'm sitting here soaking all this up, and it just reminds me of what we had at New Birth with my spiritual father, the late Bishop Eddie Long. He always empowered us to do economics amongst ourselves. And one of the things that, as you guys were talking, I was thinking about how he promoted circulating the dollar within New Birth. So we had our own Chamber of Commerce. We had a registry. If you had a business, you could sign up. You did voiceovers. If you did limo service, you could be in this directory. And he encouraged us to all go to this directory and find out if we needed a service, see who does it in New Birth first, then go outside. So I think in our churches, especially urban churches, we need to start doing that more, support our own, because it is so important to get that financial ability up. Now, I do want to ask a little sidebar question before I get to the other question, because with our current economic state, the recession, all this stuff, gas prices, digital ministry is now becoming almost a necessity, like it was in the pandemic. Because you think about it, if you're going to church, and a lot of times we go to church, more than 5 miles away from our homes. Gas is pricey. You got to choose now. I got to go to work Monday. Do I go to church? Do I pay my tithes, or do I go, get in the car and go to church? So talk about the importance of digital ministry in this climate.
Yeah, a good friend of mine has a very large church here in the city. And one of the things he did immediately during COVID was hire what he called a digital ministry team, right? Their whole job is to keep people connected. Watch this here. Not necessarily to the church, but to each other, right? But to each other. And so in this climate, I think we're going to have to be comfortable with digital ministry. If your ego is stroked by how many people are sitting in front of you on Sunday, you're in a bad position. Even not just because of COVID in a recession, the younger generation only comes to church every third Sunday anyway. Right. And so at the end of the day, right. And let me say this here, going back to what Myron talked about earlier, they don't like spin. What do you mean, Pastor, when you say spin? In other words, if your church is running 100, don't have a digital ministry that looks like you Newburgh or Lakewood. Yeah, be as raw as you can, right? But do it with excellence. And so some of the challenges that we have is that there's a whole readdressing of ministry. I firmly believe that as we move deeper into the 21st century and the years to come, churches will get smaller because they will become more community oriented and more digitally driven, right? We've watched tons of churches here go into foreclosure in the greater Houston area, mainly large churches, right? Because they could not afford, when your light bill is $20,000 a month and nobody's coming to the building and you've trained people that this is the place where it happens, right? And so you're in trouble. And so that's the reality of it. Here's the other deal, Jen, that churches don't realize. When people are driving more than 5 miles, when they get older, they stop coming. They stop coming. So here's the reality, right? We have to figure out a multifaceted strategy where we are attacking ministry and building people from multiple beachheads. We can no longer rely on the old traditional model as the get them in, get them out model, because that metric will no longer work. And it definitely doesn't work for this younger generation.
Wow.
That is good. Pastor Robinson, do you have anything to add to that?
I just think the times have shifted, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
And if we're not engaging people online and basically with this telephone here, and we're not thinking about ministry through the phone, then we're leaving a lot of leverage on the table. And here's the problem though, because it can seem like, man, we're getting at pastors. It's hard to dream when you're in survival mode.
Yeah.
It's hard to move the ball up the field when you're just trying not to get tackled right now. And so as much as we want to dream and help pastors think through digital ministry, which I think is very important, particularly for our generation, we got to get out of survival mode long enough to dream and to create. Your creative mind is hampered by your survival. And so so there are things where we gotta take things step by step and say, let's get out of survival mode long enough to dream and to create. Because the digital ministry requires creativity. Listen, I've been doing this long enough to know there are no rules on digital ministry. There are no, if you think you figured it out by the next month or 2 months,
right,
that's a whole new thing. And so we gotta have pastors who have the capacity to delegate and to dream. And when you're in survival mode, it usually doesn't happen like that. So we got to take things one step at a time.
And let me say this: I'm an organizational management coach. A lot of our ministries need to be right sized. Right sizing is a business term where you restructure a ministry and you restructure a business in order to make it effective and efficient. We're in a season now in the church, particularly in the urban church, where we need to go back in, bring somebody in. Right. And don't wear your ego on your chest. Bring somebody in and who can honestly say, you know what, maybe y'all need to kill this, and this. We have if we're going to dream, we have to right size our ministries to where we are today, right? And then ask God to give us a dream again. And 1 Chronicles 12:32, here's the verse I love, and people run past it. It's nested in there. It says this, or it says, from Issachar, men who understood the times and knew what Israel should do, right? Here's the reality. We have to stay up on the latest and greatest things that are happening, because it's not just the digital technology, it's all of technology. The world is moving at a much faster pace than the church can currently keep up with, right? And you will not be able to keep up if you're not willing to delegate right? So here's what I try to tell pastors, right? Find the one thing that you're good at, right? And then staff around you with others. And don't be afraid that you might have a Myron Pierce on your team that's a lot smarter and quicker and sharper than you. Thank God for that. Don't have a Saul mentality when David shows up.
Man.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's so good. And let me give a practical tip on that. What we have to do is to create media missionaries. And what that requires is discipleship. When I was pastoring in Florida, I created a whole media team that included digital ministry, video, graphics, copy, the whole ordeal. But it was important for me to instill and install in them discipleship and the necessity of kingdom and mission, not just having conversations online, not just chasing likes and posts. Mm-hmm. But that's very important because we can get caught up in the details of the Canva color and and those things matter, but they matter to the point by which we are evangelizing and connecting and making much of Jesus on these platforms. And so if we're going to do digital ministry, then we have to do it in a way that is honorable to Jesus, that is an appropriate way to the kingdom of God with a purpose in mind beyond follows and likes.
And I think so. I'm a little older guy, and this is what I would tell pastors. You have to figure out how to move from the digital space to the third space in your community. You say, Pastor, what do you mean by that? So the digital space can be as broad as the internet, but every young person or every person who's in that digital space has a third space in the community. You have to connect your digital space to the third space so that you can have, watch this here, real flesh pressing relationships. Did you notice that the church is not the third space? The third space could be a whole lot of places in your community, which goes back to the need for people like Jade, who are urban missionaries, that you should be willing to deploy. Listen, if we're not thinking about raising up the next generation, equipping them, investing in them, and sending them, then we are failing the church. And it's just a matter of time before the church in America and in the urban communities look like the church now looks in Europe.
I'm so glad you said that, because that process of what we do with the next generation requires money. Mm-hmm. And, I can't believe we only have 5 minutes left, but I think my landing question would be, is there anything that you wanted to share that you didn't get to share? And then for our audience, I'm sure you want to connect with Bryant, Lee, and Edward. They're going to get their information to you. If you want to be a part of it, like this ongoing dialogue, then please send me an email, info@myronpierce.com, so we can get you connected. But talk to us about, like, what is it that you wanted to share that you didn't get to share, and then we're going to land.
I'll end with this. I think pastors have to be willing to invest in the next generation, even if it doesn't benefit the local church. Mm. So if you're really kingdom-minded, you're going to invest in the next generation, even if it doesn't benefit the local church. We've been trained to only invest in things that benefit us. And that's not how Jesus operated. That's not a kingdom mindset.
Wow. What about you, Edward?
I love that. For me, I think what I want is for our urban ministers to please get out of the poverty mentality. Some people have swung the pendulum from prosperity gospel all the way to poverty gospel. And I would say that neither one of them is where we want to be.
Wow.
And so what we want is a gospel that empowers us to be who we are as sons and daughters and inheritors of a coming kingdom. What that means is that what I desire is for us to be able to walk in the authority that Christ has given us, and to be expectant of what we need in order to accomplish what he sent us to do. And so what happens is, when we get into that poverty mentality, we start to expect less. And the story of the widow's oil, you'll learn that God provides oftentimes our expectation levels. And
Wow.
so the woman with the widow's oil, when she said that we didn't have any more baskets to put the oil in, the vessels to put the oil stopped flowing. And so don't allow for God's oil to stop flowing because you stopped expecting it to flow. That's it.
Oh my God. The time went by so fast, and it was just, listen, jam-packed, jam-packed with information, wisdom. I'm just honored to be in the presence of greatness amongst these two men of God that have brilliant minds. And this has been very insightful. So real quick, in our last 2 minutes, tell us how we can connect with you all online. And if you have any books, any seminars that you have going on, let us know what you're doing during this time.
Bishop, go ahead, Bishop.
You can connect with me at thethehec.org or Pastor Bryant T. Lee on digital media. But here's what I want to say. If you must connect with one of us, connect with Ed. Get Ed to your church, to your community, to your small group, to your conference. This young man right here is going to help the urban church change a generation. But in order for that to happen, you got to invite him in. And so I want to encourage you to get Ed out to your group so that he can bring the heat. What you guys got today is a snippet of what God has blessed and birthed this young man with. And so I want to encourage that. I want to encourage that big time. Myron, I know you got a big conference coming up in August. Man, listen, if there's anything I can do to help Ed be a part of that and get there, we want to do that.
Love it.
Wow, man. I appreciate that. I'm humbled by that. Bishop Lee's a dear friend of mine, y'all. So he's the reason why I'm here today. Super, super humbled by that. Anyway, I'm Edward J. Robinson on social media, just Edward J. Robinson. I'm looking forward to be a part of that conference we got coming up. There's another one I'll be helping out with as a member of Acts 29 called Lead the City. That's in Chicago, September 9th to 10th. And then I'm willing to show up and be a help to your church. So just hit me up, Edward J. Robinson, social media.
Hey, could you give us an email to contact you at?
Absolutely. Yep. So E Robinson. Yep. E Robinson at porticocville.org. 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 E Robinson at porticocville.
Awesome. Well, you guys, that's been our time today. We pray that everything that's been said has been inspiring, and it's definitely a pleasure to have you all with us. So until next week, we'll see you later. Peace.
Peace.